Now, the situation in Ukraine is becoming increasingly desperate for those civilians who remain in the country and are unable to flee. The government says that thousands of people are now without electricity, water, or heating. For more on this, I'm now joined by global affairs analyst Michael Bociurkiw, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. You're now in Lviv. Talk to us about the situation there.
Good to be with you. Well, up until now, Lviv has been untouched, thankfully, also not too overwhelmed. But that has changed dramatically in the past 3 or 4 days, I would say, as the surge of people move from the east and the south towards here. For the most part, Lviv is kind of a transit point, but it's also a place where those who do have the means stay here. All of the hotels are booked out, private accommodation. The roads are absolutely clogged. But the city, which, by the way, is a UNESCO heritage site, it's the birthplace of Ukrainian nationalism. It's becoming more militarized, much more heavier law enforcement, soldiers, concrete barriers, tank traps, that sort of thing. And, the occasional air raid siren as well. So the city very, very much on edge.
Michael, we've seen reports about civilians being deliberately targeted by shelling. I mean, how is that changing the dynamics of this war?
Well, yes, and it's so sad. I mean, this is straight out of the Russia playbook, which, we've seen elsewhere in Syria, Chechnya. And the strategy is to encircle heavily populated urban areas, bomb them into submission, and also to push people out. I am starting to believe that with the surge of people going across the border, and remember, originally the upper estimate was 5 million, now they're talking about 10 million, almost a quarter of the Ukrainian population, that Mr. Putin and his circle are weaponizing migration, overburdening Europe with this migration. So a lot of the people I speak to, because this is a humanitarian hub as well, are saying, let's try as much as possible to keep vulnerable people within the borders of Ukraine. But frankly speaking, they have a long way to go in terms of, converting things like stadiums and other facilities to house these IDPs.
Michael, you're in Lviv. We have some trouble with the connection, but I hope you can still hear us and we can still hear you. Obviously, it's a difficult situation there on the ground. So far, the West has said no to imposing this no-fly zone over Ukraine that President Zelensky has been asking for. Are there any alternatives that the West can use to try and stop the killing of civilians?
Well, there's an immediate alternative that can be done, which presumably would not provoke the Kremlin as much as a no-fly zone, and that would be introducing a Berlin-style airlift to Lviv. Right now, what's happening is there's a big bottleneck at the Polish-Ukrainian border, all of those goods coming in. If there is a capability to fly goods in on presumably commercial aircraft from, say, Canada, U.S., and European capitals into Lviv, I think that would help alleviate a lot of the bottlenecks and, reserve the border crossings more for people. From everyone I speak to, as much as the Ukrainians are begging for that no-fly zone, and I totally sympathize with them, and they're under incredible bombardment right now, I don't think Europe can muster the political will to do that. So let's get the conversation going on something like an air bridge that could bring supplies directly in here and help alleviate suffering immediately.
There are reports today as well that there will be a meeting between the Ukrainian and the Russian foreign minister later in the week. Do you see that as a sign that there might be some kind of opening in terms of a diplomatic solution?
Well, yes, until I heard what Mr. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, reiterated today. And basically the demands are for Ukraine to recognize Crimea, recognize the thugs in the occupied Donetsk and Luhansk so-called republics, and also to apparently agree to some kind of puppet prime minister. And also the other demand from the Russian side is no to any international blocs like NATO. None of these are anything any Ukrainian prime minister could possibly agree to. So Talking is always good. I mean, the foreign ministers of the two countries haven't done that for quite some time, but the Russian side seems to be digging in its heels and putting forth conditions that can't possibly be accepted by Ukraine. And then the other quick thing, also this so-called humanitarian corridors that Russia agreed to for the third time, those conditions are also unacceptable. For example, asking people from Kyiv to go through Belarus to other countries, totally unacceptable.
Michael Bociurkiw, thank you so much for your insights there, live for us in Lviv.